Hey, do you want to know how your child might be expecting and addressing their grief and how you might be treating them as if you're grown? If you do, stick around. You will learn about how kids process grief differently than adults, and you may inadvertently be expecting your kids to grieve as if they're grown. For those of you who do stick around, I want to offer you, if you comment hashtag bite sized, that you will unlock a free 15-minute grief to healing phone conversation with me where I will give you the number one strategy on how to address grief in your household this week. For those of you who might be new here today, my name is Dr. Annette Athey, and I am a grief specialist and child development expert. I have been working in the field with children and families for nearly 20 years. Um, Again, for those of you who may not know how we do things here, if you want to comment hashtag live to let me know that you are here today. If you are watching the replay, comment hashtag replay. That helps the video stay in the news feed in our group. It's also always pinned at the top when you're looking for the latest live video. Again, so glad that you are here because I think today's topic is really important, and how we lots of times forget about what our kids are going through and how that is different than us. And again, if we are a parent maybe who hasn't experienced a loss when we were younger, we may not understand or know how that is different. And so, a couple of the things that I want to share with you today are, the first one is just how grief shows up differently for children. And I know we've talked a little bit about it in the Facebook group, and several of the parents have made comments about my child kind of is grieving for 1 minute, and the next minute it seems like they're fine and they're playing, and as if maybe it's not bothering them. And this is important because this is such a normal kid reaction. This is a normal kid reaction to grief. It's a normal reaction to when they're angry, when they're sad, when they're upset about anything. Kids just naturally pop in and out of their feelings. And so when it comes to grief, that's really no different, is that they do kind of come and go in those thoughts. And so it's not a bad thing if your child isn't constantly grieving or sad, that it is normal for them to be upset for a few minutes, talk about how much they miss their loved one, and then the next thing they're asking you about, can they have dessert? And so, again, I just want to reiterate the point that that's not that you're doing something wrong or that there's something wrong with your child, that they're not processing their emotions. It is just typical for kids to pop in and out of that grief. The second part and way that you might see grief show up differently in kids versus adults is that kids tend to learn information in almost bite-sized chunks. So if you think about it in the sense when we're talking about grief or their grief story, when they're learning about the death, they may have initially 5 or 6 questions. And then you answer those questions, and then they're done with the conversation and asking you about, can they go outside and play with their friend, or can they go and get back on the computer, or whatever it is. Kids can only process a little bit of information at a time, and so that's why I like to call it bite-sized chunks. In one of the previous videos, I talked about, hour-long podium, stand up on your speech box to talk about, here's what death is, and here's how you're going to feel. That's not going to help them understand. But popping in and out of that grief with them, giving them some tools in those bite-sized chunks is going to help them the most, instead of sitting down and let's talk about this all afternoon. They're going to process it better, but they're also going to be able to take what you said, process, does this fit? Does this not fit? Is mom telling me the truth? Is that really how grandma died? All of the things. Our kids are intelligent. They are processing all of those things. The next part that I think is important is frame of reference. And what I mean when I am talking about frame of reference is, initially, when we tell our kids about this loss and this death that has happened in our family, when you're looking at your kids, you may already have tears, or it might be really difficult for you to share what the information or the news is that you are sharing with your kids. And they may look at you with kind of this deer in the headlights, or kind of almost confusion or a minimal reaction, where, as a parent, when we're looking at our child, we're saying, but they didn't cry, or they're not really upset. And I think sometimes parents get confused on, it's not that they don't care. It's not that they aren't sad. We hear the word death, and we have our lifetime worth of experience to know exactly what that means. That means that person is gone forever. That means there's sadness, and this grieving is something now, this journey we are taking for the rest of our lives, that this is a big deal. But that's the adult label on it. For our kids, when they hear death, depending on their age, they may not understand death is forever. Or they may not understand that I am going to be grieving about the loss of this loved one for this amount of time. Or I might be sad now, but I'll be happy again. They just don't have that frame of reference because they're not old enough. They don't have the experience. Again, when adults hear about a loss, this person's gone forever, the depth of that loss, we know what that means. For instance, I've had many losses in my life, and each one has been different to me based on the age and stage that I am in my life. The first funeral I remember attending was when I was 4 or 5. And at 4 or 5, I didn't realize that death was forever, that this person I was never going to see again in person. Obviously, when my dad passed away 7 years ago, that was very clear. That wasn't a question or something that I had to process. I absolutely knew I wasn't seeing him again in this life. But it didn't mean that's where the questions all ended. Then it was a new set of questions because of where I was and how I was processing what a death loss means. I think the other part that's important, where adults see this differently, is we understand that when we become part of this death club, this club that has either lost a parent, lost a sibling, lost a grandparent, whatever type of loss it is, we are in a club that we never asked to be a part of. We never wanted to be a part of. And we also understand that in being part of this club, we now see the world differently. But that's with an adult perspective. Our kids have an innocence about them, and they don't understand that their world has forever changed. We see it through the adult lens, we see it through the parent lens of all the things that they will be missing out on, or the things that their parent won't be attending with them. But in their 5-year-old brain or 10-year-old brain, they're not thinking about graduation day, my parent won't be there with me, or my grandparent won't be there. They're not thinking about my wedding day and my parent won't be there. Those are adult layers that we put on that loss. We anticipate this is going to be a big milestone, and most likely we're right. That is where these losses are going to show up, and the grieving will look different. But from the kids right then and there, they don't see that. They don't notice all of those additional grief layers because that's not in their experience or their awareness yet. So for those of you who are here, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions or share. And if you have, those of you who are catching the replay, if you have any questions, feel free to comment in the chat. I will absolutely answer those questions. But again, something to think about. And my question to you, and I would love for you to answer in the chat, is, are you treating your child as if they are an adult grieving? Or are you allowing them to grieve differently? And now that you have this information, maybe looking at their grief a little differently has helped point out some of those spots where maybe you didn't realize that this was an adult thing versus a kid thing. Again, I would love to have some conversation in the chat. And for those of you who are here and who are interested in a free grief to healing conversation, I would love for you to comment #bite-sized so we can have a conversation about what to do in your household, and I can help you with the number one strategy that will help address grief differently in your household with your healing kiddo. And absolutely, we can talk about how grief might look different for you as the parent versus your child. And most of the time, it's not that we're doing it wrong, it's just differently. And when we have that awareness and that knowledge that kids grieve differently than adults, and I'm sure we've all read that, but if we don't know what those specifics are, we don't always know what to look for. So I hope that today's conversation helps you see things a little differently, and I look forward to seeing you in the group.